Hello, friends. Welcome back to Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, Chapter 30. We're almost halfway there, I'd say. Look at that. What do you guys think? You think we can do this by Halloween? I mean, if I keep this pace up, maybe. The goal is by Halloween. Anyways, last time we just met Lady Catherine de Bourgh. She was not too impressive, and neither was her young sister or daughter. I'm not entirely sure the relationship there. Again, there's too many people. So we met them. Elizabeth was unimpressed because Lady Catherine kind of insulted her upbringing, or her, I guess, where she learned her martial arts and stuff in China, and said you should have gone to Japan instead and had ninjas, and you didn't have ninjas, which is crazy because who has ninjas? But anyways, now they're leaving, and and Lady Lucas, Charlotte Lucas, now Charlotte Collins, I guess, because married to Mr. Collins, is turning more and more into a zombie every day. So that was chapter 29. Fun one for sure. Anyways, chapter 30. Chapter 30. Sir William stayed only a week at Hunsford, but his visit was long enough to convince him of his daughter's being most comfortably settled. Mr. Collins devoted his mornings to driving Sir William out in his gig and showing him the country, but when he went away, the whole family returned to their usual employments. Yeah, I just forgot my water over here. Take a big sip. It's a lot of work, reading out loud. I'm thinking of things to say here and there, but I'm just wasting time now. Now and then they were honored with a call from Lady Catherine, and nothing escaped her observation during these visits. She examined into their employments, looked at their work, and advised them to do it differently, found fault with the arrangement of the furniture, and detected the housemaid in negligence. And if she accepted any refreshment, seemed to only do it for the sake of finding out that Mrs. Collins's joints of meat were too large for her family. Elizabeth soon perceived that though this great lady was no longer engaged in the daily defense of her country, she was a most active magistrate in her own parish, the minutest concerns of which were carried to her by Mr. Collins, and whenever any of the cottages were disposed to be quarrelsome, discontented, or too poor, she sallied forth into the village to implore them to settle their differences, or failing that, wielding her still mighty blade to settle them herself. She knows what she wants. She gets what she wants. She's, the magistrate, as they say. The entertainment of dining at Rosings was repeated about twice a week, and allowing for the loss of Sir William and there being only one card table in the evening, every such entertainment was the counterpart of the first. On one such occasion, Elizabeth was solicited to spar with several of her ladyship's ninjas for the amusement of the party. The demonstration took place in Lady Catherine's grand dojo, which she had paid to have carried from Kyoto, brick by brick, on the backs of peasants. Ugh, wow. The 1%, hey? The ninjas wore their traditional black clothing, masks, and tabby boots. Elizabeth wore her sparring gown and her trusted katana sword. As Lady Catherine rose to signal the beginning of the match, Elizabeth, in a show of defiance, blindfolded herself. "My dear girl," said her ladyship, "I suggest you take the contest seriously. My ninjas will show you no mercy." "Nor I they, your ladyship." Miss Bennet, I remind you that you lack proper instruction in the deadly arts. Your master was a Chinese monk. These ninjas hail from the finest dojos in Japan. If my fighting is truly inferior, then your ladyship shall be spared the trouble of watching it for very long. Elizabeth set her feet, and Lady Catherine, realizing she would never convince such a stubborn, unusual girl, snapped her fingers. The first ninja drew his sword and let out a battle cry as he charged directly at Elizabeth. When his blade was only inches from her throat, she moved from her opponent's path and dragged her katana across his belly. The ninja dropped to the floor, his innards spilling from the slit faster than he could stuff them back in. Oh my god, she's actually killing them. Well, damn. Here's a picture of all this happening. Whoa! Look, she's blindfolded right there. That ninja, I think this is the one she just, ripped out his intestines or slit open his stomach. Anyways, cool stuff. This is cool. Ninja dropped to the floor, his innards spilling slit fat, blah, blah, blah. Elizabeth sheathed her sword, knelt behind him, and strangled him to death with his own large bowel. Lady Catherine snapped her fingers a second time in another ninja charge, this one unleashing throwing stars as he advanced. Elizabeth drew her katana and shielded herself from the first 3 flying weapons, and snatched the 4th out of the air and threw it back at its originator, striking him in the thigh. The ninja cried out and grabbed the wound with both hands. Ah! Ah! The ninja cried out and grabbed the wound with both hands, and Elizabeth brought her blade down, taking not only the hands, but the leg, which they held firmly. The ninja fell to the floor and was promptly beheaded. Savage. Though discontented with such a beginning, Lady Catherine held the greatest hopes for her 3rd and final ninja, the deadliest of the 3. But no sooner had she snapped her fingers than Elizabeth flung her katana across the dojo, piercing the ninja's chest and pinning him against the wooden column. Elizabeth removed her blindfold and confronted her opponent, who presently clutched the sword handle, gasping for breath. She delivered a vicious blow, penetrating his ribcage, and withdrew her hand, with the ninja still beating hard in it. As all but Lady Catherine turned away in disgust, Elizabeth took a bite, letting the blood run down her chin and onto her sparring gown. Oh my goodness, what? Sometimes this can be so slow, and then it just turns up like that, like, crazy. It's like she's so, honestly, like, modesty is a huge thing in this book, and she's like, now she just let loose. Wow. I don't even know. I'm at a loss for words, guys. Curious, said Elizabeth, still chewing. I've tasted many a heart, but I dare say I find the Japanese ones a bit tender. Oh, that's like throwing shade, like kicking them down. Her ladyship left the dojo without giving compliment to Elizabeth's skills. What a bitch. The other engagements were few, as the style of living in the neighborhood was beyond Mr. Collins' reach. This, however, was no evil to Elizabeth, and upon the whole, she spent her time comfortably enough. There were half hours of pained, almost unintelligible conversation with Charlotte, and the weather was so fine for the time of the year that she had often great enjoyment of out of doors. Her favorite walk was along the open grove which she edged that side of the park, where there was a nice sheltered path, which no one seemed to value but herself, and where she felt beyond the reach of Lady Catherine's curiosity. In this quiet way, the first fortnight of her visit soon passed away. Easter was approaching, and the week preceding it was to bring an addition to the family at Rosings, in which so small a circle must be important. Elizabeth had heard soon after her arrival that Mr. Darcy was expected there in the course of a few weeks, and though there were not many of her acquaintances with whom she did not prefer, his coming would furnish one comparatively new to look at in their Rosings parties, and she might be amused in seeing how hopeless Miss Bingley's designs on him were, by his behaviour to his cousin, for whom he was evidently destined by Lady Catherine, who talked of his coming with greatest satisfaction, spoke of him in terms of the highest admiration, and seemed almost angry to find that he had already been so frequently seen by Miss Lucas and herself. Mr. Darcy. Ooh boy. His arrival was soon known at the parsonage, for Mr. Collins was walking the whole morning within view of the lodges opening into the Hunsford Lane, in order to have the earliest assurance of it, and after making his bow at the carriage, turned into the park, hurried home with the great intelligence. On the following morning he hastened to the Rosings to pay his respects. There were two nephews of Lady Catherine to require them, for Mr. Darcy had brought with him a Colonel Fitzwilliam, the young son of his uncle, and, to the great surprise of all the party, when Mr. Collins returned, the gentleman accompanied him. Charlotte had seen them from the husband's room, crossing the road and immediately running into the other, told the girls what an honour they might expect, adding, "Thank you, Eliza, for this piece of civility. My Darcy would never come so soon. Wait upon me." Ugh, that is tough. She sounds awful. Elizabeth had scarcely time to disclaim, all right to the compliment before their approach was announced by the doorbell, and shortly afterwards the three gentlemen entered the room. Colonel Fitzwilliam, who led the way, was about 30, not handsome, but in person and addressed most truly the gentleman. Mr. Darcy looked just as he had been used to look in Hertfordshire, paid his compliments with his usual reserve to Mrs. Collins, and whatever might be his feelings toward her friend, met her with every appearance of composure. Elizabeth merely curtsied to him without saying a word. Colonel Fitzwilliam entered the conversation directly with the readiness and ease of a well-bred man, and talked very pleasantly, but his cousin, after having addressed a slight observation on the house and garden to Mrs. Collins, sat for some time without speaking to anybody. At length, however, his civility was so far awakened as to inquire of Elizabeth after the health of her family. She answered him in the usual way, and after a moment's pause added, "My eldest sister has been in town these 3 months. Have you never happened to see her there?" She was... I can't wait to find out. She was perfectly sensible that he never had, but she wished to see whether he would betray any consciousness of what had passed between the Bingleys and Jane. I do too, I want to know. And she thought she perceived a slight twitch in his eyes as he answered that he had never been so fortunate as to meet Miss Bennet. The subject was pursued no farther, and the gentleman soon afterwards went away. Chapter 31. Colonel Fitzwilliam's manners were very much admired at the parsonage, and the ladies all felt that he must add considerably to the pleasures of their engagements at Rosings. It was some days, however, before they received any invitation thither, for while they were visitors in the house they could not be necessary, and it was not till Easter Day, almost a week after the colonel's arrival, that they were honoured by such an attention, and that they were merely asked on leaving church to come there in the evening. The invitation was accepted, of course. At a proper hour they joined the party in Lady Catherine's drawing-room. Her ladyship received them civilly, and was in plain that their company was by no means so acceptable as when she could get nobody else. Colonel Fitzwilliam seemed really glad to see them. Anything was a welcome relief to him at Rosings, and Mrs. Collins's pretty friend had moreover caught his fancy very much. He now seated himself by her, and talked so agreeably of the engagements at Manchester, and of the marvel of new mechanical weapons, of his favourite methods of slaying the sorry-stricken, that Elizabeth had never been half so well entertained in that room before, and they conversed with so much spirit and flow as to draw the attention of Lady Catherine herself, as well as of Mr. Darcy. His eyes had been repeatedly turned towards them with a look of curiosity, and that her ladyship, after a while, shared the feeling was more openly acknowledged, for she did not scruple to call out, "What is that you are saying, Fitzwilliam? What is it you are talking of? What are you telling Miss Bennet? Let me hear what it is." "We are speaking of the deadly arts, madame," said he, when no longer able to avoid a reply. "Of the deadly arts? Then pray speak aloud. It is of all subjects my delight. I have my share in the conversation if you are speaking of the deadly arts. There are few people in England, I suppose, who have more true enjoyment of them than myself, or a better natural ability. Had Anne's health allowed her to apply, I am confident that she would have become a great slayer of zombies as I. How does Georgiana get on with her training, Darcy?" Mr. Darcy spoke with affectionate praise of his sister's proficiency with Blade and Brown Bess. "I am very glad to hear of such a good account of her," said Lady Catherine, "and pray tell her from me that she cannot expect to excel if she does not practice a good deal." "I assure you, madame," he replied, "that she does not need such advice. She practices very constantly." "So much the better. Cannot be done too much. And when I next write to her, I shall charge her not to neglect it on any account. I often tell young ladies that no excellence in the deadly arts is to be acquired without constant practice. I have told Miss Bennet several times that she will never be my equal unless she practices more, and though Miss Collins has no dojo, she is very welcome, as I have often told her, to come to Rosings every day and spar with my ninjas, provided she promises to kill no more of them. She would be in nobody's way, in that part. She would be in nobody's way, in that part of the house. Mr. Darcy looked over a little ashamed of his aunt's ill breeding and made no answer. Yeah, it's like, come on, how uncouth. When coffee was over, Colonel Fitzwilliam reminded Elizabeth of having promised to give them a demonstration of her considerable finger strength, and she set about fastening a modesty string around her ankles. Lady Catherine and the others observed as Elizabeth placed her hands upon the floor and lifted her feet heavenward, her dress kept in place by the modesty string. Holding herself thus, she then lifted one of her palms off the floor so that all of her weight rested on but one hand. Mr. Darcy presently stationed himself so as to command a full view of the fair performer's countenance. Elizabeth saw what he was doing, and at the first convenient pause wore an arch smile and said, "You mean to frighten me, Mr. Darcy, by coming in all this state to see me? I will not be alarmed. There is a stubbornness about me that can never bear to be frightened at all at the will of others. My courage always rises at every attempt to intimidate me." To emphasize this point, she lifted her palms so that only one fingertip remained connected to the floor. "I shall not say you are mistaken," he replied, "because you could not..." Okay, hang on. I need some water before this. "I shall not say you are mistaken," he replied, "because you could have not really believed me to entertain any design of alarming you, and I've had the pleasure of your acquaintance long enough to know that you find great enjoyment in occasionally professing opinions which, in fact, are not your own." Elizabeth laughed heartily at this picture of herself and said to Colonel Fitzwilliam, "Your cousin will give you a very pretty notion of me, and teach you not to believe a word I say. I am particularly unlucky in meeting with a person so able to expose my real character in a part of the world where I had hoped to pass myself off with some degree of credit. Indeed, Mr. Darcy is very ungenerous in you to mention all that you knew to my disadvantage in Hertfordshire, for it is provoking me to retaliate, and such things may come out as will shock your relations to hear." "I'm not afraid of you," he said, unsmiling. He said smiling, not unsmiling, smiling. "Pray, let me hear what you have to accuse him of," cried Colonel Fitzwilliam. "I should like to know how he behaves among strangers." You shall hear then, but prepare yourself for something very dreadful." Elizabeth pushed off the floor with her fingertip, landed gently upon her feet, and unfastened her modesty string. "The first time of my ever seeing him in Hertfordshire, you must know, was at a ball. And at this ball, what do you think he did? He danced only 4 dances, though gentlemen were scarce, and to my certain knowledge, more than young one lady was sitting down in want of a partner. Mr. Darcy, you cannot deny the fact. I had not, at the time, the honouring of knowing any lady in the assembly beyond my own party." True, and nobody can ever be introduced in a ballroom. Well, Colonel Fitzwilliam, what shall I demonstrate next? My fingers wait your order." "Perhaps," said Darcy, "I should have judged better had I sought an introduction, but I am ill-qualified to recommend myself to strangers." "Shall we ask your cousin of the reason of this?" said Elizabeth, still addressing Colonel Fitzwilliam. "Shall we ask him why a man of sense and education, who has been sculpted into a killer of the highest order, is ill-qualified to recommend himself to strangers? Strangers." It's like I have an accent, I don't. I have one, I don't. Pick one. I'm sorry if it's bad. Just trying to immerse you. Immerse us all. Okay, I'm just going to read that part again. "Perhaps," said Darcy, "I should have judged better had I sought an introduction, but I am ill-qualified to recommend myself to strangers." "Shall we ask your cousin the reason of this?" said Elizabeth, still addressing Colonel Fitzwilliam. "Shall we ask him why a man of sense and education, and who has been sculpted into a killer of the highest order, is ill-qualified to recommend himself to strangers?" "I can answer your question," said Fitzwilliam, "without applying to him. It is because he will not give himself the trouble." "I certainly have not the talent which some people possess," said Darcy, "of conversing easily with those who I have never seen before. I cannot catch their tone of conversation, or appear interested in their concerns, as I often see done." "My fingers," said Elizabeth, "do not possess the strength your aunts do. They have not the same force of rapidity, and do not produce the same deadly results. But then I have always supposed it to be my own fault, because I am not to take the trouble of practicing. It is not that I do not believe my fingers as capable. Darcy smiled and said, "You are perfectly right. You have employed your time much better." Here they were interrupted by Lady Catherine, who called out to know what they were talking of. Elizabeth immediately fastened her modesty string and began walking about the room on her fingertips. Lady Catherine, after observing for a few minutes, said to Darcy, "Miss Bennet would make fine showing of leopard's claw. Miss Bennet would make a fine showing of leopard's claw if she practiced more, and could have the advantage of a Japanese master. She has a very good notion of fingering." "That she does," said Darcy in a manner such as to make Elizabeth's face quite red. Elizabeth looked at Darcy to see how cordially he attended to Miss de Bourgh, but neither at that moment nor at any other could she discern any symptoms of love, and from the whole of his behaviour to her she derived this comfort from Miss Bingley, that he might have just been as likely to marry her had she been his relation. Lady Catherine continued her remarks on Elizabeth's performance, mixing with them many instructions on execution. Elizabeth received them with all forebodings of civility, and, at the request of the gentleman, remained on her fingertips till her ladyship's carriage was ready to take them all home. And that does it for chapter 31. Chapter 32 now. Holy moly, we're making progress. All right, what do you guys think? I don't like Lady Catherine that much. She sounds kind of like full of herself. Mr. Darcy is softening up, and Elizabeth is just like playing with him right now, I think. And I mean, I kind of have an idea of what's gonna happen. I haven't read the book Pride and Prejudice before, but growing up, I heard about my mom. She told me all about it, so I used to watch the movie all the time. Anyways, chapter 32 next. Subscribe, hang out with me, read a book, or listen, or I don't know. Yeah, thanks. Ciao, bye.